Good evening. My name is Peter Tarsi, and this is another installment of Legislative Update with Representative Speaker of the House, Robert DeLeo. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you for having me.
It's been a while since we did a show.
Yes, yeah. Well, we got involved with the budget and educational issues and all kinds of issues. So it's good to be back.
You're a very busy person.
I am. I have to admit that I am.
You don't know what side of the state you're in day by day, I bet.
Sometimes, where was I? Yeah, one day I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce in Leominster. The next day I was in Springfield, and then I was in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. So,
do you wake up in the morning and saying, where am I?
It's interesting. Sometimes over the weekend before, I go through it, so I'll make sure I've got everything all set in terms of I can give myself enough time to get all these different places. But
there's something I have to express my condolences to you. The Red Sox didn't win.
No,
I know that's your pet.
That's my love.
I
Yeah,
know.
Yeah. I'd have to say that. Yeah, they just didn't have it this year. You could just tell they started off 2-8. Things started really badly. Never really got out of that funk they were in. They win some, then they lose some, and then we felt, well, maybe they'll come back. But I'd have to say, despite the fact that it's been, although the series have just started, it has been fun. And,
Yeah, unfortunately.
And of course, we got our Patriots, and the Bruins look like they're doing well, and
we have our 7'6" center.
Yeah, yeah.
The one thing that gets me about the Red Sox is they didn't have a bullpen. I don't care what anyone said. They did not have a closer.
Well, they didn't have many starters either.
Well, yeah, but they didn't have the closers. They lost a lot of decisions, when they were ahead and so forth, because they didn't have someone that could stabilize the bullpen, shall we say.
Yeah. And then the starters got hurt. Sale, Price, and Evaldi didn't come back till he had some bone chips removed. So they just had a whole host of issues. It's funny you should say that, because one of the vice presidents of the team is coming in to talk to you, not about baseball. He has a child with autism, and he's very much involved in it, so he's coming in to talk. So I'm sure maybe we'll throw a little something in about baseball, because
Talk to John Henry. He'll probably do something.
well, when I see them, it's funny when you talk to them and they're losing. I guess the mood at Fenway Park isn't very good, I guess, when they're not doing very well in terms of them not only the loser, but listening to the talk shows and whatnot, who are very displeased with how they're doing. So, but
We could do a whole show on
yeah, I
this.
was just going to say, baseball I could probably know more about than anything else, but
Oh, don't say it that way. Now, the last time we spoke, I think you were going into fiscal 20 budget. It hadn't been determined and so forth and so on. What are some of the new items or restructured items from 2019 to fiscal year 2020 budgets? What may be different?
I think, again, I think there are a lot of similarities in the sense that we put on, for instance, we made sure that we kept our commitment relative to the opioid abuse, gave record amounts of money on education and local aid. I think the senior care was again one of our major issues that we dealt with. So I think that in terms of the budget itself, I think you basically saw a continuation of some of our commitments that we had made earlier, but those were some of the major commitments that we had.
You were talking about education.
And not to mention, by the way, I'd be foolish not to mention, obviously, some of the earmarks which we had in previous years, and Winthrop and Revere, we kept them going as well.
You were talking education. I know there's education bills that were passed and so forth, and I would take it both from the House and Senate.
Well,
in the budget.
Well, the education, what I was talking about was education funding. Okay, now the education bills, which is a separate entity, That just came out of a committee.
I
It was
see.
heard in the Senate, passed in the Senate just last week. It's coming over to the House now. So
What does
that's
that
what's
entail?
going. Well, one of the biggest things that we have found was the fact that when we're talking about education, this is probably about a $1.5 billion investment in education. So this is really a major investment in education. It's something which has been endorsed by the Teachers Association, Superintendents Association, and just a number of groups. But one of the things that we had seen was, although Massachusetts, shall we say, is always considered at the top or near the top in terms of education results, there is still a terrible achievement gap that occurs, when it comes to some of the lower income areas of the state. So what this bill tries to do is to try to level the playing field, if you will, to give money to those communities who could use it probably more than others, and so that to make sure that every child in this Commonwealth has the opportunity to get a good education.
Now, I have a little, shall we say, synopsis of the bill. And reading it, it says charter tuition reimbursements. What's that for? Or
Charter
what is it?
tuition reimbursements are, when the charter schools open, they are public schools. Therefore, for the number of students that go to those charter schools who aren't going to the regular public schools, they get money from the state as well.
Now, a regular public school, you get funding from the state, funding from the community. A charter school gets funding from the state. Where do they get the extra money? From the people that go there, from the parents?
No, the charter schools, again, are primarily, probably, I would say, they're a public school, so they get treated like any other school.
So they would get money like from Revere?
Right.
Oh, all right.
Right.
But they're just not within the Revere.
But they
Public school system.
They are actually.
No, I'm saying
they're a public school, but they're
separate from.
Entity, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is there's guidance and psychological services.
Yeah, one of the things, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the major items I think that we had found was the fact that, especially in our schools right now, it's a little bit different maybe than, or maybe it's not so different, but at least some more attention is paid to it. One of the issues that we have in terms of is what's going on in the schools, and the issues that a lot of children seem to have today a little bit different than what they might have been, some years ago.
You mean like when you and I went to school?
Well, yes, yeah. I had visited the Revere High School Health Center some years back. Actually, I think I just became chair of Ways and Means, so that's, maybe some 10 years ago. And we started to talk about what was going on with the kids. And so I spoke to the so-called school nurse. Now, my memory was that when you were in school, primarily maybe you went into the nurse if you didn't want to take a test or something like that, or to avoid a class or something like that. But some of the pressures and issues that children are going on today, Peter, are a whole lot different. And I had found that some of these children, need to get some real psychological help as well. Maybe their home environment may not be the best. Maybe they're not eating properly, not being fed properly, not being with the various pressures that are on them and how they're reacting to it. So, quite frankly, that's one of the issues that we've been really taking a strong look at.
You could be
For illness,
considering
I
it
filed a bill.
I'm sorry to bother or to interrupt, but bullying could be one of those that they're concerned with.
And bullying has changed quite a bit to the point where we now is probably one of the strongest bullying laws.
No, I'm saying psychologically.
Right. And that changed dramatically, I think, because of technology. The bullying not that any bullying is okay, but now it's gotten to the point where some of the things they put online really hurt children and really can hurt them
Yeah.
Psychologically. But one of the things that I have emphasized has been the role of early education, for instance, and the importance of early education. And we have made some real strong investments in early education. But one of the things I also learned is the fact that when we take a look at our educational system, whether it's early education or above, we tend to take a look at it in silos. Silos meaning, okay, we just take a look at the child and how they're doing in school. But sometimes we don't realize what's going on in that child's life as a whole. And, that some of their school issues may involve other issues in terms of what's going on at home. And you have a 2-year-old child who's getting thrown out of a nursery school or preschool, whatever you want to call it. There's some issue there. No child at that age. Now, is it a learning issue that's sort of coming out at that age? Or is it, some type of a psychological issue that this child may have? Or is it a family issue that they may have? So I think that the younger that we can address and take a more holistic approach to it, I think the better off that we'll be. So I think that's one of the things, a piece of legislation called the Child Wellness Bill, which I had filed that passed the House, that's in the Senate now, and hopefully will be passed in the Senate as well, that we take a look at those children. In addition to that, we take a look at those children who are in our DCF facilities, for instance, as well, to make sure that we're paying enough attention to them and that they're getting, the attention that's due to every child in the Commonwealth.
Getting back to the education bill, there's a little article that said Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA. Now, I know both Winthrop and Revere participated that in past years. Revere, if I'm not mistaken, got 5 new schools because of it. Funding, I'm not saying 100%, but a percentage paid by the state.
Right.
Winthrop, I think, was 2, if I remember, maybe 3.
Well, Winthrop, don't forget, has the Cumming schools, the Gorman Fort Bank School, and now the combined.
Right, that's why I say I think it was 3.
Actually, every single one of Winthrop schools have been
Funded.
refurbished. I'm sorry, refurbished, have been rebuilt. And now Revere, I think the only one
Is the high school.
that remains is the high school, and
And they're talking about that now.
Now getting that done as well. I mean, one of the interesting things about when you're talking about refurbishing schools and the work to be done on schools, first of all, putting more money into it so more schools can get done. But secondly, what you don't realize is the fact that, again, for years, that little red old schoolhouse, so to speak, that people talked about. But again, with the new technology, with what's going on, relative to biotechnology, chemistry, and whatnot, the laboratories that are needed, those are a whole lot different in terms of the learning environment for our students and what they need and what we got maybe in some years past is a whole lot different. So if we're going to keep up with the technology in our schools, then we have to invest more money so that our children who want to go into, we'll say, the STEM education, that they're going to be better prepared.
Well, remember, the older schools either are not space-wise suitable for, shall we say, modern times.
Right, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about laboratories and
Right,
whatnot.
but I'm just saying, or they don't have the electrical systems or the heating systems.
Right.
To spend $100,000 to improve here and just throw the money out the window in a way because it's going to be a makeshift remedy sometimes.
Yeah.
Or build a new school.
Yeah.
In the longer, it's better to build a new school, especially if you're getting state funding.
Yes, and I visited some of the schools, not only here in my district, but throughout the state, and I saw where, some maybe have been suitable relative to a complete refurbishing, and it's worked out really, really well. On the other hand, sometimes the so-called investment that you're making in refurbishing isn't worth it in terms of what's going on because of things like the heating system or whatnot, asbestos, and some of these other issues that they have, that it's best just to start from day one. And again, both communities, have these beautiful, facilities. Again, and Revere is online now to get a new high school as well. That's something that they've been working on
That I know.
with our office.
Now, one thing we spoke about previously, we have hands-free driving. First it was seatbelts, and you couldn't be stopped for a violation for seatbelts. But if you were speeding and you didn't wear a seatbelt, you could be cited both ways.
Right.
Now with hands-free, which I think takes effect July 1st?
Well,
Or is
no.
or January 1st?
No, we've got an issue with hands-free because we're right in the middle of a conference committee. And one of the issues of the conference committee is whether it will go forward, because there's disagreement amongst the branches of basically in terms of whether you would have hands-free and what data will be collected. There's various advocacy groups out there, and rightfully so, who are concerned that because of the hands-free, the minority population may be looked upon a little closer in terms of how they're driving than the non-minority population. So right now that is something which is in conference that's being taken a close look at. My feeling is that if it continues to be a problem, if it continues to be a disagreement, and we thought we had an agreement with the Senate, but it didn't quite work out as we had hoped. But I think we're at the situation now where I think that we ought to, if we can't come to a resolution, which the chairs are talking about, then I think that we ought to talking about splitting the legislation so that we can get the hands-free part of it done, and then we'll keep on squabbling or discussing, shall we say, the other part of the bill, the data collection part of the bill. Because what I'm concerned about is that the longer that we keep this bill in conference, the longer the better the possibility is, God forbid, that there's going to be an accident and someone's going to be severely hurt or in some cases killed. So that's what I'm hoping that we're going to go. But in any case, I think that at some point here in Massachusetts, you're going to see a hands-free legislation that will be passed.
I hope people understand hands-free doesn't mean you have to have Bluetooth.
No.
It could be a holder somewhere, dashboard, center console, that the phone could be there and use speaker.
Right.
That's hands-free.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily meaning an old car versus a new car with Bluetooth.
Right. Right.
So people have to understand that.
Exactly. It's funny you should say that because that was one of the ideas that I had. To be a lot easier for me, not being the most technologically advanced like you are.
I'm not technically advanced. I still use an abacus.
to go with that in that manner.
Yeah. There's something here, Greenworks.
Yes.
What basically is Greenworks?
Greenworks, very basically, is one of the issues that I see as one of the major issues I think facing us as a state, as a country, as a world for that matter, is the fact of climate change. And so one of the ideas which I had filed and was, or I should say the chair of Energy had filed on my behalf and was passed by the House and is in the Senate, is called Greenworks. And Greenworks is a bill wherein we provide some $1 billion over a 10-year period to our cities and towns on projects that they consider to be important relative to climate change. Now, the biggest probably difference between that and other bills is that this leaves it up to the cities and towns to make application, for funding for these projects. Because one of the things you learn is the fact that obviously when we think of storms and whatnot, what do we think of in Winthrop and Revere? We think of flooding. we've seen flooding in places that we hadn't seen before. And I think, that, to me anyways, in Winthrop and Revere would be the biggest district. But as you travel throughout the state, I think you find that obviously not all states are about the Atlantic Ocean, such as we do. So their issue relative to, climate change, climate resiliency, if you will, may be different from what ours is. So what this does is it gives each and every city and town in the Commonwealth the ability to come forward and to make application to decide how they can better protect themselves, if you will, or better prepare for the changes, not to mention what we can do as a Commonwealth to help control the ill effects of climate change that are occurring.
So basically you're saying something to the effect, and I may be wrong in stating this. Let's just say Winthrop as an example, Town Hall, emits fumes from the heating system, okay? And if there's a more sensible and more efficient way of heating the building, that's what that could be used for?
That could be part of a project which is, yeah, anything that would control climate change. Again, I'm thinking probably more of the Winthrop Revere would probably come on issues relative to flooding and whatnot.
Well, I'm just using that as an example.
But that could be, yeah, sure,
All
sure.
right. See, when you say greenworks, I'm thinking of green space,
Yeah, yeah. I think we were looking for a phrase that would get people's attention and has gotten people's attention. The Environmental League of Massachusetts has come out in strong support of the legislation. The Mass Municipal Association, they really like it because of the fact that it talks about every city and town in the Commonwealth, so they're very excited about it. People like it because there's no increase in taxes. It's bonding funds. Again, it's $1 billion of investment, which I think is probably higher than most, if not most states in the country. So what I tried to do was to make sure that people see that we know that this is causing havoc with our atmosphere, and that we take it very seriously, and we're putting our money where our mouth is to say, hey, now we're going to give each city and town the ability to.
I know that you are a staunch supporter of funding to help opioids.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the question I have for you is vaping.
Yes.
It's a very big, shall we say, uncontrolled product right now. And the reason I say uncontrolled, it's causing, and again, I may be saying it the wrong way, there's deaths caused by supposed vaping, lung damage caused by supposed vaping. The governor has put a moratorium or a halt on sales of certain vaping products. And that's just within the last month, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, 4-month delay, and as a matter of fact, it was interesting. The same day that the governor did that, we had come out with a piece of legislation of our own, which wasn't coordinated with the governor's office as well, dealing with vaping. And when I say that, I'm talking about coming up with a more of a comprehensive solution in terms of what we were going to do. You hit it on the head. I think right now, I think if you talk to some doctors, they will say that the issues with vaping are just as bad as the issues with smoking. There are some people on the other side who say, no, I'd rather vape than smoke, that's safer, shall we say. I think we need time to come up with which one is which, but let us just say I think I'm probably convinced that both aren't good for you. As a matter of fact, in talking about vaping and talking to some of the doctors about it, it appears as though the ability of the cancer-causing agents, may be a little bit stronger in a way with the vaping.
Well,
What
vaping, I don't think
hear-
they said cancer.
Huh?
I don't think they said cancer. Right now, it's just lung disease. That's how
Well,
they classify it.
It could be that, but it could also.
Oh, yeah,
But it could
down the
lead
line,
to other
yeah.
things, right? But it's interesting as we were talking about education earlier, and new high schools, and we talked about education. The issue that I hear from superintendents, besides obviously the usual issues relative to financing and the condition of schools, is vaping. They tell me that you go into some of the schools and or a lot of the schools, I think actually now you go into the restrooms, which I guess has existed for a while, but it's getting worse and worse in terms of what's going on. The other thing that the legislation that we have now is the provision relative to flavored tobacco. And what I'm concerned, quite frankly, is that when you're talking about flavored,
Now we're talking tobacco or vaping?
well, vaping, but I guess
Okay.
in a sense maybe both, that you're talking about that is something that's just more attractive as a way of bringing in the younger people, into these
The adolescent.
into these habits that we're trying to stop. So I think that within the next couple of months, I think you're going to see more and more discussion about this. I think you're going to have more and more debate about it. So I think vaping is going to be one of the major issues that we're going to be talking about.
I know one thing they're concerned with is the flavored refills, let's just say it that way, because they're not controlled by the Food and Drug. They can just pass it through. That's one thing that I think the federal government has to do is have the FDA certify them,
Well, in some of the other things,
like they did to tobacco.
right, and some of the other things that I'm not sure how exactly they occur, but with the vaping, sometimes they're putting in or including in them, not the stores or anything, marijuana, and
The oils.
and other, and other things that obviously cause further issues. So.
Well, that's what I'm basically saying. It's uncontrolled right now.
Well, I think originally it came out, when vaping first started, I think it came out as an alternative to smoking. And I think a lot of folks said, this is good, now we have that alternative. But what it turned into was that, although may looked upon an alternative, now when you have the various flavors, when you come up with the fact that some of these flavors are doctored, with other drugs and other, bad ingredients, then, that causes a problem.
Yeah, I know one thing. I was being retired. I was home watching TV, and I saw a Senate or a House hearing. I forget what. Probably was a House hearing, and it had to do with vaping. And one thing that they brought up was Philip Morris, if I'm not mistaken, owns a major portion of Juul's vaping product. The problem also is the knockoff refills, not made by legitimate companies like Juul. I'm talking ones that are imported like from maybe China. And I'll just say China as an example. It may very well be from China, may not be. But the point being is it's being knockoff. That's what they're concerned with, because they have no control on them. The other thing is, the unfortunate part is it has to come to a point where the federal government really has to get into this. And I think they're starting to realize that it's a deadly thing. Because the CDC in Atlanta, I believe it is, they can't find the cause of the lung infection right now. And they're
Right.
concerned.
Right. Well, in terms of what's happened in Washington,
No comment on that.
well, I mean, these are some of the things that we've reached out to our, and it's not our Massachusetts senators or congressional delegation, anything else like that. We've been the leader in terms of so many other, health-related issues. But, I'd have to say one of the things I've been talking to Washington has been, the concern I have relative to the proliferation of guns that there are in our society right now. This is just just another thing that I'm hoping that some people will say, hey, this is an issue that we really have to, address, and not just listen to some of the so-called big money advocates that may be out there and say, hey, this is hurting our society, whether it's guns, whether it's vaping, whatever the issue may be. And so what's going to happen in Washington, I don't know. The only thing that I look upon here in Massachusetts is that we do what we can do under our law. Massachusetts has always been a special place when you talk about protecting freedoms, when you talk about protecting liberties and whatnot, when you talked about healthcare, our university system, our technology, our manufacturing. And I think that my role as Speaker is to do whatever I can to make sure that we retain that status that we have around the country.
And with that, I have to cut you short.
I have to go, okay?
All right. Please tell the people how they can get in touch with you.
Sure, they can give me a call at any time at 617-722-2500. And just let people know, whether it's a discussion about some of the issues of the day, such as, vaping or education, as we were talking about, or whether it's a personal situation that you may have relative to some Massachusetts bureaucracy. Feel free to give me a call, because as I've stated once, I've stated it 1,000 times, that I enjoy my role as Speaker, but I'm there because of the people of Winthrop and Revere, and I want to try to be as helpful I can with any personal issues they may have as well. So that's 617-722-2500.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for visiting us, and hopefully the next time you see our two faces won't be, shall we say, a long way off.
Okay.
But again, have a good night and hope to see you soon.